This video is about red flag clients. I'm gonna talk about what they are, some signs that you can use to identify them, some tips to protect yourself when you're potentially gonna work with them, and 3 examples of my most memorable red flag clients. And I'm specifically focusing on the part before you enter a contract with them. Because if they've accepted you as their consultant, you're kind of stuck till the end of your contract unless you have some protection measures in place. There are situations where people might change partway through, but I feel like a lot of people show you who they are in the early stages, and it's up to you to pick up on those signs. And it's just a matter of experience and maybe caution and sensitivity, and you'll eventually start picking these out. If you end up with a red flag client, no worries. That's just like the rite of passage of any of these experiences. What is a red flag client? To me, a red flag client is someone that you want to avoid working for under normal circumstances. They're likely to be difficult, high maintenance, unreasonable, demanding, etc. But there are going to be situations where you can't avoid it. Maybe you need money. Maybe you work for a boss who insists that you meet a certain quota and you can't not work for them. There's nothing wrong with actually working on them, because maybe what I would consider intolerable and too much of a red flag client is not going to be an issue for someone else. I may just have stronger boundaries or lower tolerance, or just enough negative experience to not want to go through that. But that's not the case for everyone. You might just need to implement some protection measures for yourself to make sure that this client doesn't steamroll you and take advantage of you. Here are my signs of red flag clients. I only included them on here if they were truly red flags, because there are some things that are annoying and part of business, but they're not red flags. Like someone simply asking for a discount. That is not a red flag to me. It's just, what is their behavior afterwards? The first one is the client has retained the services of multiple arborists, especially if they are consulting arborists. It's different if they've gotten 3 bids from tree services and everybody's variable, because the quality of a tree service recommendation or even their arborist is kind of variable. To me, it's perfectly normal for someone to question these variable opinions and then want you as the consultant to actually give a unbiased opinion. But there are also people who don't trust the opinions of anyone, and what they do with these expert opinions is they pit them against each other. So that's a sign that they may not necessarily trust you either. But what makes this a massive red flag is if they've retained the services of multiple consulting arborists, especially if they're arborists that you know who don't have good reason to turn these jobs down. Like if they're retiring, that's totally valid. If they are moved out of the area, totally valid. But if you know that those consulting arborists are all active and taking on clients in your area, then it makes you wonder, why is this person churning through these arborists? Another flag that I've noticed is when someone expects you to be extremely responsive on their preferred time frame without respect for what your schedule might be like. So that might look like emailing, calling, or texting in rapid succession. If you agreed to get them information by a particular time, they start following up well before that time. They might call repeatedly, leaving multiple messages. They might say stuff like, "Oh, it seems like you didn't get my call," or "You didn't get my message," or "You didn't get my texts." These are all signs that people expect you to be at their beck and call and to respond to them as soon as they contact you. Now, what is or isn't reasonable as far as a response time is concerned depends on a couple of things. It's going to depend on probably what your employer's expectations are for you and what you personally, what kind of standard you hold yourself to. I think that it is to some extent reasonable to respond within a couple of days, let's say 2 business days or something like that, because you may be out in the field, you may be doing something that you don't have reception for, or maybe you have a deadline that you have to do and you're not necessarily going to be checking on email and text and stuff like that afterwards. But that's me and the experiences that I've had. I would never expect another member of the project team to immediately respond to me. I would give them a couple of days. If it's really urgent, then maybe I'll follow up after 2 or 3 days, but I do not expect 24-hour turnaround, and I think it's unreasonable to expect other professionals to give you that. It is different if you are someone who prizes yourself on that, you hold yourself to a higher standard, or if in your market, if you don't respond quickly enough, you lose clients. Those are all valid reasons. To me, if someone is expecting a really rapid response time, let's say less than a business day or 24 hours at the very beginning, that's an indicator as to what they're going to be like throughout the project. And I am not someone who can offer that, and I try to set the expectations early on. For you, this might not be a red flag at all. It might just be a normal business activity to be responsive. But regardless of what your personal standards are, pay attention to people who use passive aggressive language when they're trying to get you to respond, and what that might be like. Oh, it seems like my call didn't get through or my message didn't get through, because the underlying meaning of that is, had it gotten through, there's no way you wouldn't have contacted me already, so why not? Another red flag is when people want you to do their work faster, but they're not willing to pay you for that special treatment. Anyone can ask if you can do it sooner, and then it's up to you what you want to tell them. But if someone keeps pushing and they want you to do it ASAP, but they're not willing to pay you for that accelerated service, then it's just entitlement. They think that they're more important than your schedule, and they're more important than the clients that you already have, and they just want you to put their needs above your own and above the needs of other people. If someone wants you to accelerate the timeline and they're totally willing to pay you for it, then that's up to you if you want to take on rush jobs. Another red flag is someone who wants a discount and are pushy about it. Again, it is fine for someone to ask. Part of business, there are people of certain cultural backgrounds that will just ask you for discounts. In my area, there are certain ethnic groups. If I give a proposal to someone of that ethnic group, I can expect them to ask for a discount. I don't take it personally. I'm not offended, because this is just how someone has learned to do something. It's more about what their behavior is like after I turn them down. But I turn them down, and oftentimes they'll just move forward with the project. But there's no harm in asking. And that also applies to business people. So if I was working with a developer and they ask for a discount, it's just business, right? Everyone wants to reduce their costs so they can increase their profits. And it's not personal that they're asking you. If someone's asking you, they're probably asking everyone else as well. This is one of the flags that you want to look out for in relation to other flags as well. It's if they ask for a discount, they might also be at the same time asking you to do it sooner, and that will let you know that it's going to be a more difficult client. Another red flag is someone who tries to negotiate your terms. Typically, we have certain processes set because it works best for our workflow, or it gives us the level of protection that we want. And there should be minimal situations where you go backwards on that, right? You don't want to make exceptions for no reason. Some of the situations where I might do that is if I have a really large client and I really want that job, then I might adjust my terms. And if you think about you going to get a service from someone, you go to a store and you want to buy something and they want you to pay before they give you the product, like a reasonable person is not going into a business and trying to negotiate their processes with them. If it's not something you want to agree on, you can find another vendor or another person to fulfill your needs. That's normal. But for someone to want to negotiate reasonable terms, that should be a flag, and then you should start looking out for other behavior. Another red flag for me is someone who refuses to communicate in writing, especially if you've already asked for that. Writing is good, like email communication is great because it keeps a log of what you guys have said. It's easy for you to respond, to communicate asynchronously. You don't have to be available at the exact same time, and you just do the communication once. Compared to phone calls, this happens even with people that I like. I'll have a phone call maybe while I'm driving, and then by the time I get back to the office, maybe I'm distracted about other things. I don't remember what we've discussed, and then you have to email anyway. So in some cases, it's a lot more concise, it's a lot more efficient to do that in an email. There are people who love to do intake or to get to know clients and discuss projects on the phone. That's totally fine. It's when you've asked otherwise that, at some point you don't have to be discussing these things over and over and over, especially if they're not actually your client yet. And if someone refuses to put stuff in writing, that is kind of like a yellow flag. Look for other things that might change it to a red flag, because it makes you wonder, what is it that this person may want to hide? Like, why are they abstaining from having stuff recorded in Word? Like attorneys, for example, that totally makes sense. They'll call because they don't want the records to be discoverable. But if someone is just trying to get your services, why would they refuse to tell you in writing? What are they trying to hide, basically? Another category or set of red flags is a client who is not fully open about what it is that they want. Someone who seems to have a hidden agenda. Someone who may be exhibiting unethical behavior, and also someone who seems to be wanting to skirt laws or regulations. Sometimes you'll sense this as roundabout talk, like they're kind of asking you all these questions to get an answer that they want when they don't want to answer that question directly. One example of a client that I had like this, they were asking these leading questions about their neighbor's tree, one that was growing into their view, and something like subtly about herbicide. So I was very direct with that client, and I just let them know that herbicide has very specific symptoms that, any arborist who knows would be able to figure it out. And there is some amount of disturbance, whether that's to a trunk or the roots or the soil. People can start suspecting that stuff. It's a little harder to prove, but something like that is enough to scare a client away who clearly wants to kill their neighbor's tree for their own gain. As far as skirting around rules, there are people who maybe want to cut down protected trees before they retain your services. And I personally haven't really had that, but I think other arborists definitely have. You can just be direct with them that that's not something that you're willing to be complicit on. Unless you are, then this is not for you. It's important to be direct with people like that, to let them know that you're not gonna participate in their scheme. So if that's something that they want to do, either know that you're gonna be reporting stumps of protected trees, or that they should find someone else. This is a little bit different from someone who wants you to not do the full scope of work. So let's say a city wants a certain amount of information for a tree inventory or for a development project, and they want to save money, so they want to do a limited scope. That's different. I've done stuff like that before, but I make it very clear, both in the proposal and in my actual report, this is the scope of work that was requested, and it may not fulfill the city's requirements. You don't want to be associated with people who regularly, try to get around rules or that practice unethical behavior, because that will taint your view in the image of the city staff, and it's much more important to maintain that relationship. The next red flag for me is a client who has a specific idea of what they want, specifically what they want the outcome of your work to be, and they're inflexible about it. I don't mean a situation where a client has a preconceived notion, like my tree is dying, my tree is dead, my tree is damaging my foundation. Some of those conceptions are just based in ignorance or a lack of knowledge, and many clients will trust you once you explain that, for example, maybe a diseased tree isn't necessarily something that has to be removed, or maybe there's another cause for that foundation damage rather than tree roots. But the client type that you would look for is someone who doesn't trust your opinion after you explain things like that, and still insists upon having whatever outcome they already have in their mind. They're not willing to change their opinion, and they basically just want to hire you as a hired gun so that you can put your name on whatever opinion they already hold. From the arborist standpoint, this is a sign of unethical behavior from the arborist, at least like consulting arborist. You should be objective in your opinion, regardless of who the client is. Not who's paying your bill, then your opinion will veer towards one that benefits them. The next red flag, this is probably the easiest one to catch, is rude and unprofessional behavior. For a normal person, even a lay person, there's a level of politeness that should be expected when you're dealing with someone that you don't know. I mean, basically you should be on your best behavior at that time, because it's a first impression, or you're trying to figure out the other person. So a client who is rude and unprofessional off the bat is throwing up red flags that you really need to pay attention to. Some of the unprofessional behavior could look like micromanagement, and that can apply in the early phases, even before you start working for them. Just maybe like micromanaging your schedule, your response time, how they want or insist upon you communicate. It could be personal attacks and criticizing your qualifications and knowledge in a way that's more than just regular question. It's going to feel different. It's going to feel more malicious. They could berate you. That has happened to me. They bring a lot of negative emotions with them in their communication, and they may be pushy and disregarding of your boundaries. If you see signs of bad behavior right off the bat, chances are they're not going to improve. And the last red flag that I have is for people who look up their clients ahead of time. I don't actually do that, even though I know I posted another video about looking people up. The people that I don't look up are my clients. I think in part I don't really want to know who my clients are, but if your client is a company, like a developer, another business, I think that would be a good time to look them up. If you look them up and they are regularly in the news for shady stuff, like lawsuits and stuff like that, they're engaging in shady behavior that gets them sued over and over. And when someone sues someone else, it kind of drag everyone into it. So you're at greater risk of getting sued because you associate with that client. I have a client who is like that, and I'm going to try to step away from that as soon as possible. So this section is going to be my top 3 most memorable red flag clients. And the first one, I did actually work for them. There were you might laugh. Anyways, for background, I was early on in my career. I was a new consultant. She was a Vietnamese immigrant. Being rude and critical is not an uncommon characteristic of older immigrants. And I was used to this behavior because of my personal background. So that's sets the scene for why I tolerated this behavior. I would not do that anymore. So I first got connected with her through her architect, whom my boss and I had worked with multiple times before. And I sent her a proposal for her arborist report because she was going to build a new house. So after I sent it to her architect and her, since he was the one who connected us, she called me and berated me on the phone. Like, why would you send my proposal to my architect? I don't want him knowing my business. I don't want him knowing how much things are going to cost. And that was the first thing she said to me. Then she moved on to asking line by line about every single thing in the proposal. She was grilling me, basically. Like, what am I actually getting for this? She was that harsh about it, to the point where I was so pissed off by the end of that call that that I hung up and was like, that fucking lady. Like, I just said that loud. And I looked at my phone and I didn't hang up. Anyways, she didn't hear because she hired us. And it didn't get any better. It was time for construction. Her contractors wanted us to look at some trees during the process, and we did, and we sent her the bill, and she flipped out. She was like, they should not have asked you to come do this. Like, you did not get this approval. I got a little addendum letter for that particular situation. They sent it to the city, and the city fined her for unintentional damage to the trees. And then she flipped out again, and she started blaming us, which I didn't call the city to tattle on her. The city inspectors have eyes. They can see that the trees have been damaged. So she was really on us for a long time. And the same kind of behavior, very rude, very critical, just yelling at us. And finally, I got permission from my boss to get rid of her. We fired her as our client, and she just kept calling over and over. At that point, very nice, emailing, calling, and we just ignored her from that point on because we were already very clear that we were not going to work for her anymore. So obviously, when someone calls you and berates you, you should think twice. You should really think twice about taking them on as a client. The second example was a situation where I had provided a proposal again for a development report, and he said that he had questions and he wanted to talk on the phone. He was talking about these trees that he wanted to keep and the landscaping project that they wanted to do. Since I had already looked at the plans to put that proposal together, I let him know that there's a chance that those trees have to be removed, or if you want to keep them, you have to change your plan. And his answer was, I'm keeping the trees, I'm not going to remove them, and I'm also not changing my plan. So that's an example of the red flag where someone has a particular outcome for your work already, and they're not going to be flexible about it. Then he also asked me to shorten my time frame and get his stuff done sooner, and I said no. Then he asked for a discount, and I said no. But he asked it in a really weird way, like, can you sharpen your pencil on this? So this was a situation where just based on the things that came up, I did not feel comfortable going into it. So I talked to my friend about it, and basically it was like, this is a red flag client, right? I gotta turn this down, right? And she agreed. So I took back my proposal. I said, I'm not available for work anymore. You're gonna have to find another arborist. And then he starts emailing, calling, and texting saying, no, like, I think you're the arborist for me. Like, let's discuss this more. And just kind of acting like I had never said, I'm refusing to work for you. And after a little bit more of that, I finally had to email him and say, in my last email, I took back my proposal. My services are no longer an option. I'm not working for you, and I'm not going to respond anymore. So it was a little odd. Really, like, he really thought that he was giving me the opportunity to do this work for him and that I should be honored for it. And the last red flag client checked a lot of boxes. This was very recent. Okay, so this last situation is kind of complicated because there's a lot of people involved. The two property owners are the actual client, who is the neighbor, let's call her nice neighbor, and the red flag exhibitor is the owner of the tree. I'm just gonna call him tree owner. So then they were collaborating on a fence project, shared property line fence, and the tree owner had a tree right next to the fence, and they just needed to put in posts. So the only impact on the trees is, like, if you look in the background here, you're just doing posts every so often, 8 feet or whatever is standard. And that was it. But there had been other issues leading up to it, some issues along that tree property line area, and this was a situation that I was walking into without actual knowledge of that. The reason why I was being invited in to this project is because the nice neighbor had an arborist who was going to be out of town for quite a while, and I was going to come in to substitute in that arborist's absence. And in their absence, because this was the last thing that needed to be done, we thought maybe I could just take over the rest of the project. It'll be done and we'll all move on. So I agreed to it. I had a little inkling that the neighbor was like a little bit high maintenance, but that was an understatement for sure. The tree owner also has a consulting arborist. So now we have 2 consulting arborists on this side for the nice neighbor, and 1 right now for the tree owner. Once they've kind of agreed that I would work as a substitute, I started getting calls from the tree owner. And the first call went something like, give me a call if you have any questions and I can catch you up on the project. Then I get a call within a day saying, you must not have gotten my first call. Call me back. So to him, it was not an optional call that I was supposed to call him. It was like a 20-minute call. Basically, he was trying to micromanage the relationship between me and the arborist who brought me in, and us and the neighbor. And I guess like the 2 property owners had an agreement between themselves, and he was just talking, like starting to bring up all this legal stuff, saying that he put a call into his attorney to see if I could actually step in or not, and on and on and on. And I just thought, like, wow, I haven't even started on this project. I'm trying to do these people a favor to finish this project for them, in the original arborist's absence. So why is this guy who owns the tree trying to manage the relationship between the three of us on the opposing side? And remember, I said he himself had an arborist. So I started looking at the introduction email. I saw that on the day when the fence was scheduled to be put in, his arborist only said, "I'm not available." He didn't offer any other dates. I thought that was a little weird because it's your client's tree that you're hired to kind of give your opinion on and try to protect. A lot of arborists love to be in that situation. So why did you not offer alternative dates? Why did this situation get set up for a third arborist to come in who had no history on this site? And then I looked again at the emails even more closely. There was yet another arborist who had worked for the tree owner at some point. And when I finally got the address of this property, dude, I have been on the tree owner's property with another consulting arborist as a field assistant, like a subcontractor. So now you're saying that this tree owner has gone through 3 consulting arborists, high caliber, by the way, really high caliber, 20 plus years in the industry. Why is he churning through all these people? I did not feel right about this. I felt like with the way this guy was talking about his attorney, the fact that this fence would pass right by the trunk of the tree and you're gonna damage some roots. It's almost inevitable. So I felt like if I actually went through with this, that I would walk into lawsuit territory. So I backed out of that. And before they took me off the emails, I saw that the tree owner's arborist actually did step in and offer dates afterwards. So I just, I don't get it. Like, that's something that should have happened to begin with, instead of making it messier by even creating the opportunity to bring in yet another arborist. This section is tips. I don't think they're in any particular order. So, number 1, if it isn't too late, you can always back out and rescind your proposal and rescind your services. Just let them know that you can no longer do this work for them, as long as they haven't agreed to it. There are other options, like let's say in your proposal, you could have an option for them to sign and then for you to countersign. And that means that both of you have to sign it first. So if they've signed and you haven't signed yet, then technically you could still pull back. I don't do this. I've seen it on larger contracts, like multi-page contracts. It usually has to be countersigned by the client as well. But that is something that you could include in your proposal if you're so inclined. Another tip, if you can sense that they're going to be difficult to work with, whether they're micromanaging, high maintenance, all of that, you can charge more. Charge as much as it makes sense for you to basically bribe yourself to deal with this client. You could consider an asshole tax. You could consider it a extra service kind of fee, because inevitably a red flag client is going to take up a lot more time, emotion, effort than a normal client, and you should be compensated for that. If you are in a situation where other arborists have worked with this client before and there's no good reason as to why they would have left, if you're willing to reach out to these other arborists, there's nothing wrong with that. Just give it a try. It doesn't hurt, and you might be able to find some insider information about a client, and you can do with that information what you will. If you have not given the client a proposal yet, and this sort of thing is where it helps to be able to call or email with a client for a little bit before you give them a proposal. But if you already have an idea that they're going to be difficult, but and you still want to take this client on, set up some processes that will protect you, both your money and your time. That could look like requiring a deposit or a retainer of some kind before you start work, and requiring final payment before you release the deliverables. That way, if they cancel on you throughout the process, you've already been prepaid and you don't have to wait around for them to pay you, if they pay you at all. You could create really detailed proposals, be very precise in what you're including as your scope of work and what you're excluding, so that there is no room for debate as to whether you fulfilled the contract or not. You can also put exit paths, like areas where you can exit. This might be more of a contract rather than a proposal, but maybe places where you guys can end your relationship. If they are engaging in unethical behavior, if they're not paying you, then you reserve the right to cancel on the relationship or cancel on the job. I've seen this in contracts, again, usually longer ones, so I don't know how you would put that into your proposal. I've done this once for a construction monitoring job, that I will not continue work if the invoices are not resolved. And I think I put that in there because the client was an architect firm rather than the actual contractor or the actual owner. You could also put in something like, I don't provide drafts of the report or the deliverables before payment, because some people want to see what you're going to say. If they don't like what you're going to write, then they may not pay their bill. Basically, anything that you can put in to cover your ass and to have something in writing that you can point back to say that you actually did your job, that will be really helpful to protect yourself. Let's say you're in a situation where you have to work for them, you can't get out of it. There are things that you can do, again, to protect yourself, your peace, whatever, while you're working for them. Don't go out of your way to accommodate them like you would a good or loyal client. Some clients just really motivate you to do good for them because they're really nice people or they're really good clients. This is not going to be one of them because they're a red flag client. So what that could look like is, especially for self-employed people, keep normal business hours. Don't respond to them outside of that. Protect your time. Maybe mute them. Turn your notifications off or something. Just make it so that they can't reach you all the time, and specifically so that you don't see their messages, because that can ruin your day too. You can also set expectations about how to communicate and how often that happens. I'm not recommending you do this, but I'm not all that responsive to clients. It's variable. And the reason is, if you're always responsive, people know that when they text you, they're going to get a response right away. So it's more worth their while to text you or to email you because they know you're going to respond. But if you don't respond that quickly, maybe it takes you a day or two, again, not recommending it, this is just what I end up doing, then it sets expectations for them to not expect quick responses from you. And clients don't know your schedule. You could be in the field for multiple days. You could be, working in situations where you don't have a lot of reception. There are things that can affect your response time. And clients, unless there are emergencies, they're not entitled to have your attention and your time at their command. If it is a true emergency, that is a different situation. It would also be good to keep your communication in writing as much as possible so that you have something to point back on. You don't want to get in a situation of a he said, she said, especially with clients like this. You want to be able to point back to written records, especially where either of you said something that the other person is trying to misrepresent. Another tip is to actually trust your gut. Your gut is telling you something. There's a reason why you would feel uncomfortable at a situation, so listen to it. if you can't figure out why, this would be a good time to talk to someone and get a second opinion. For 2 of those red flag client situations, I actually did talk to someone, and in one of the cases, that person was encouraging me to do the job, but as I was sorting it out, as I was talking it through, I realized, no way, like I gotta turn that down. When you're talking to this person, definitely keep their background in mind. When you have, let's say, a sales background or a business owner background, you might be subject to certain pressures, like making sure that you satisfy a client, making sure that you get enough work for your crew to be fully employed. Those are things that will change their decisions compared to someone like me, who only has to support themselves. And lastly, after you work for them this time and you've gotten paid, don't work for them again. My final thoughts is, this is a rite of passage. Dealing with difficult clients, it takes a long time to fine-tune your senses so that you don't walk into situations like this, or at least you walk into them with a little bit more knowledge and capacity to protect yourself. It can be easy to be hard on yourself for not seeing this kind of situation before you walk into it. But, for your own peace at least, do what you can to see what you can learn from the situation. Kind of look for silver linings and the benefits that you can glean from it. Whenever you deal with a client that's difficult, it does, well, ideally it would thicken your skin or you would just fall apart. There are always things that you can learn, whether that's more effective communication, gaps in your proposals or your reports, whatever. There are a lot of potential lessons and some unexpected ones too. Like in my situation, make sure that you actually hung up the call before you curse at a client. Like that's a pretty big one.